Available? Ready? I'm not sure. Technical difficulties here. Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's shir. Tonight is Thursday evening, Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul reminds us that the Yomim Noraim, the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, just around the corner in a month from now. In Mitzvah Hashem, we start blowing the shofar tomorrow, preparation for Chodesh Elul. And Chodesh Elul, Rosh Chodesh Elul, the whole month of Elul is a time of tshuva, time that we reconnect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know, there's a very famous statement of the Kaf HaChaim. The Kaf HaChaim was a very great Sephardic Rav and leader of the community. He was born in Baghdad in the 1800s, and then he moved to Eretz Yisrael, and I think he was nifter in the 1930s, I think 1939, if my facts are correct. And he was buried in Har HaZeis. And the Kaf HaChaim tells us something very fascinating. He says that on Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is today, 2 days Rosh Chodesh, Thursday and Friday, we should learn, and every Jew should study the Sefer, the book of Chagai. We know there are Treyos Nevi'im, there's 12 Nevi'im. These 12 Nevi'im are put together in one Sefer called Treyosar. And these Nevi'im, these prophets, most of them said only a few prakim. Chagai was one of the last Nevi'im, one of the last prophets that lived. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. And his nevuah, his prophecy is only 2 prakim long, only 2 chapters long. And the Kaf HaChaim says that today on Rosh Chodesh Elul, we should open the book of Chagai and study it. And it's only 2 chapters, 2 prakim, we could study it. So I'm not going to learn the whole Sefer. Why do we have to learn the Sefer Chagai? Because the nevuah, the prophecy of Chagai, Hanavi, was given on Rosh Chodesh Elul, today. So therefore, because it was given on Rosh Chodesh Elul, we should learn and study Sefer Chagai. That's what he tells us to do, the Kaf HaChaim. You know, Chagai, not much is written about this Navi, this prophet. Chazal tell us that Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, all 3 of them, the last three Nevi'im that lived, there was the last Nevuah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave before Klal Yisrael went into Galus. And Chagai was part of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And Chazal tell us, it's actually a Gemara Megillah, Daf Gimel, that Targum Yonasan, the Targum on Nevi'im, which we know Yonasan ben Uziel wrote, he learned it, he accepted it, he had a Kabbalah, Mipi Chagai, Zechariah Malachi. Chagai was one of his teachers who taught him how to write the whole Targum Yonasan. Anyway, he says, Kaf HaChaim says we should learn Sefer Chagai, so let's learn at least a little part of it tonight, because after all, it is Rosh Chodesh Elul. And the Navi tells us a very fascinating thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Nevuah to Chagai, and says, Koyamar Hashem Tzvakos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is in Perek Aleph of Chagai, Simu levavchem al darchechem, alu hahar, go up to the mountain. Hashem commands Chagai, go up to the mountain. Havesem eitz, bring down some wood. Ubenu haboyis, build the Beis Hamikdash. The Eretz Haboy, we know the second Beis Hamikdash was built at that particular time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the command to Chagai, Hanavi, went on Rosh Chodesh Elul to start the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And the pasuk says, "Ubnu haboyis, build the Beis Hamikdash ve'eretz haboy. I'll be pleased with it. Ve'akovda am Hashem. I'll feel honored by it." And the commentaries in Mitzvah David tells us, even though kiyia katan, you're going to just take a piece of wood, you have to get the best wood. No, get a piece of wood, anything. Whatever you do, it's time for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. So Chodesh Elul seems, if average Jew, we think that Chodesh Elul is the month of tshuva. the month that we have to return to Hashem. Sound the shofar, say David Oiri. It's a time that we do tshuva before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. At the same time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Chagai, Hanavi, to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Chodesh Elul. Is it tshuva? Is this month the month of tshuva? Or is it the month of, how should I put it, Geula, redemption? The month where we're going to rebuild the third Beis HaMikdash, Emes Hashem. Which one is it? So to answer this, I think it's something that we say 3 times a day in our siddur, in our davening, in our Shmoneh Esrei. One is dependent on the other. We can't rebuild the Beis HaMikdash until we finally do tshuva. How do I know this? We say it in Shmoneh Esrei. Hashiveinu avinu seirasecha, Ibaynu shaleiram, Hashiveinu, bring us back to your Torah, Kaveinu malkeinu avodesecha, bring us back to your avodah. Baruch atah Hashem haraitze b'shuva. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we daven and we pray that we should do tshuva. Slachanu avinu ki chatanu. The next paragraph we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for slicha, for forgiveness. And then finally, after 2 paragraphs of teshuva and slicha, then we get to Geula. Then we get to redemption. Reva Nyenu, Riva Rivein, Goleinu Meir Machma, redeem us. Baruch atah Hashem Goel Yisrael. So we see it's not a contradiction. These weeks, where the whole month of Chodesh Elul, we read haftarahs which are part of the Shiva de Nechemta, 7 haftarahs of Nechama, of comfort. After Tisha B'Av in the 9 days, the whole month, this is the only month. Last month, the month of Av, only part of the month we read Nechama. We read consolation and comfort. This month, the month of Elul, the whole month, we read Nechama, comfort, where like today's Haftarah, this coming Shabbos Haftarah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Navi, in this week's Haftarah, Hashem tells Yeshaya, Anoichi, Anoichi, hu menachemchem, I'm going to myself, God says. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'm going to bring Nechama, I'm going to bring comfort. So this month, which is the month of Nechama, is the month of comfort. We're part of the Shiva de Nechemta. It's also the month of Gula. It's also the month where we anticipate and we hope and we daven that there should be the Gula. And therefore the Navi, the Kaf HaChaim, tells us every year on Rosh Chodesh Elul, today we should read Chagai, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Chagai to start the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. So Geula, redemption, and Teshuvah, and getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are connected. It's not 2 separate things. We need the Teshuvah in order to bring the Geula. We need to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for us to be worthy of being redeemed, and the third Beis HaMikdash and Mashiach comes. So I want to tell you a few thoughts about the parsha. We know that every year, without exception, I know my father-in-law, he's always, if you ask him, from time to time, I ask him, what day does this parsha come out? What day does this Yontif? He always is able to tell me, the last time this happened was 7 years ago. I don't remember 7 years ago, but he'll tell me something that he remembers exactly what the day of the month, what the Yontif. There's one thing, I hope my father is not going to disagree with me. There's one thing that always happens. The first week of Elul, we always read parshas Shoftim, without exception, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the first week of Chodesh Elul, every single year, without exception, we read Parsha Shoftim, this coming Parsha. What is Shoftim? We want to do tshuva. We want to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu too, that we should merit the redemption. So let's look into Parsha Shoftim and find some insights of how we're supposed to do tshuva. How we're supposed to get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, after all, the Kaf HaChaim says we have to read Sefer Chagai, these 2 chapters of Chagai, where the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem commanded Chagai specifically on Rosh Chodesh Elul. Let's look at the parsha. So the first point I want to tell you is a thought from my Rebbe, Rav Gedalia Shor, Zechat Tzadik Avracha. Rav Shor Zatzal was the Rosh Yeshiva in Tarvadas, and I had him as a Rebbe. He used to give a shir, 12th grade, when we were Beis Medrash Cotton, they used to call it, like going from a sifta, from high school to the Beis Medrash. Rav Shor Zatzal used to give a shir in the Ramban during the week after Shachris, and he was a genius of a person. And Rav Shur said the following thought about this week's parsha, which maybe brings a person closer to God, closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The pasuk tells us in this week's parsha, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. A man is compared to a tree. Eitz hasada is compared to a tree that's bearing fruit. Now, what does a man, what does a human being have to do with a fruit tree? What does one have to do with the other? So he asked the question, Rav Shur, and he spoke about this, and I think it's written in his sefer. He says we can compare an individual to a fruit tree, to a tree. You know what a tree is all about, Rav Shur would say? A tree is different than grain. A tree, grains, seeds, you have to plant. If you have tfuah, yisasada, for example, wheat and other things, it has to be replanted every year. Every year you have to do it again and again. A tree doesn't have to be replanted. A tree that gives off fruit, every year it gives off fruit. You don't have to replant it. You have to take care of the tree. But you don't have to replant the tree. It always gives peiros. When it comes spring and summer, fruits start growing. So too, he says, that's why the Torah Akdesha in this week's parsha compares a human being to a fruit tree. We don't have to start from beginning. He says, but rather, the purpose or the goal of an individual is to take his koiches. Every person has his characteristics and his capabilities and his kishreinis, and he has to use it properly. And each person has these koiches hagdolim, these great powers. Every person has certain powers and certain attributes. You don't have to plant it again. We're not like seeds that have to be planted each and every year. It's within us. And therefore, just like a tree that gives off fruit every single year, if it's taken care of, it gives off more fruit and more fruit and more fruit without replanting it. So too, we have to develop our personalities, our characteristics, our capabilities, that it should be automatic. That we don't have to replant our capabilities, but rather it should come from year to year in our service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He calls it, I'm going to read, it's printed in his Sefer, Al-Gedalyahu, I'm going to read part of it. He says, Kol Adam yesh lo koiches gedalim. Every person has great powers, not physical powers, but rather powers that he's able to accomplish here in this world. Tamunim b'kirbo, they're hidden within us. The tafkid Adam, the challenge of a person, his goal, he doesn't have to replant and plow the fields. He's like a tree, without plowing, without putting seeds, like a tree. You have to work on the tree, you have to water the tree, you have to make sure to take care of the tree, in order that the fruits will not spoil, that'll grow properly. So too, if a person works upon himself, a person who works upon himself, the kaiches, the capabilities that are hidden within him, automatically should come out each and every time, every year. And that's why we're compared to Adam Eitz Hasada. So the first thought that we think about when the Kaf HaChaim tells us we have to read Sefer Chagai on Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first thought we think about is that we're like trees. We have capabilities. Every person has their capabilities. I mentioned this many, many times because sometimes we take it for granted. And some people have different capabilities. Some people have capabilities of doing chesed. Some people have capabilities of doing tzedakah. Some people have capabilities of learning Torah. Some people have capabilities of singing beautiful songs, inspiring individuals like that. Many capabilities. We have to develop it. That should come automatic. We don't have to start again. So the first lesson taught to us in parshas Shoftim, which every single year we read the first week in Chodesh Elul, the month of preparation for the Yom Narayim, we read parshas Shoftim. First lesson that's taught to us is that we have to realize that we have these capabilities and it should come automatic. Just like a tree has to be watered and to make sure and pruned, and so too the capabilities that we have to develop them. We can't let them go and be dormant within us, but rather it should come out automatically. That's lesson number one. We know there's another thought. There's many thoughts in this week's parasha. The second thought is a quote from the Chassam Sofer. In this week's parshas, the Torah talks about a melech, a king. King, what he's allowed to do, what he's not allowed to do. And the Torah tells us in this week's parsha, a Jewish king, he has to have a Sefer Torah. Besides a regular Sefer Torah, he has to have a second Sefer Torah. He takes it with him. Simple interpretation, he takes the Sefer Torah with him, and he reads from it all the days of his life. Some Sefer asks the following question. The king is a very busy man. He has to answer all the people that ask him questions. He has to give advice. He has to decide whether they go to war, they don't go to war. He's busy a whole day. You think that a king is going to be sitting in the Beis Medrash and learning the Torah the entire day? He's going to read it each and every day throughout his life. Is that what a king is going to do? Doesn't sound like that's what a king is doing. We look, even just Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef in Mitzrayim, when he was a viceroy, he was busy the whole day, taking care of the food and his brothers that came. And look in the Nevi'im when we talk about the various kings. David HaMelech. You think David HaMelech sat in the Beis Medrash? He was busy. He was a warrior. And yet, despite everything, of course, David HaMelech was a great tzaddik. He wrote Sefer Tehillim. But what does the pasuk mean? So Chassam Sofer says a beautiful thought. He says as follows, and maybe this is the second lesson for all of us. The king has to be an ideal person that we have to look up to the king. He has to influence, inspire us, inspire all the people of Klal Yisrael. You know what it means? It means that whatever he does doesn't mean he has to sit and learn 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Halavai, but that's not what the pshat is. Rather, the Chassam Sofer tells us, you know what pshat is? It means that whatever he does, he's going to look into the Torah and he has answers to everyday life, everything that he accomplishes. And so too, some people think that, I learn Torah and that's it. I spend a few hours, halavai, a few hours every day. And then when I go out to the world, whether the business world or whatever I'm doing, that's a different story. No, you take the Torah with you. The lesson that's taught to us by the Melech, by the king, is that everything is Torah. Not that Torah is one thing, my life is another thing, but every step of the way is Torah. This past week, 2 days ago, was the yahrzeit of another Rebbe of mine, Rabbi Avraham Palm, Zecher Tzadik Avracha. I probably was close, although Rav Shur was a great, great person, but he was nifter when I was a young man. I was still in first year Beis Medrash. I probably was 17 when he was nifter, so I didn't have an opportunity to get that close to him. But Rav Palm Zatzal, I had an opportunity to be in his shir for many years. Before he became the Rosh Yeshiva, I was in his Gemara shir, then I was in his Yeridei shir. Rav Palm's yahrzeit was Chav Ches Av, just 2 days ago on Tuesday. I want to tell you a little story about Rav Palm. Many stories. Ask any Talmud of Rav Palm, and they'll tell you so many maises, so many stories about what took place and how he was such a great person with his humility. Anyway, I'll tell you a story, and the only reason why we know the story was there was a Talmud with him. A student was with him. Rav Palm was once going on somewhere, he had to go somewhere, and a student was going with Rav Palm on this trip, and they hailed a taxi many years ago. And the taxi, they got into the taxi, the Rav Palm and his Talmud, going to a wedding, I'm not sure. And the taxi driver started to drive away, and he didn't put on his meter. So Rav Palm said, you forgot the meter. Rav Palm was a very, very honest person. Your meter is off, put on the meter. So the taxi driver told him, I don't want to put on the meter. I work. I don't own the taxi. The medallion is owned by my boss. If I put on the meter, he's going to take a certain percentage. I don't get the full amount. I'll charge you $12 to get to that location. So Rapam said, listen, it's very nice. I'm sorry you have to share your profits with your boss, but I don't know if it's so honest. Could you please put on, I feel more comfortable if you'd put on the meter. So the man said, listen, no, I'm not putting on the meter, but I'm only going to get it. If I charge you $12, I'm probably going to get, after expenses and paying the boss, $5, $6, I have to pay half of it back to my boss. Otherwise, get out of the taxi. I don't want to. So Rapam didn't know. It was cold, very cold outside that night. So Rapam said, okay, you know what? Put on the meter, and I'll pay you $12 on the meter and $12 off the meter. So you won't lose any money. And you know why Rapam did this? It's because every step of the way, everything he did was a Torah decision. Everything he did was a Torah decision. Can I do this? Am I permitted to sit in the taxi? Most of us would say, yeah, okay, it's on the meter. You go to Eretz Yisrael, the monit, half the times you have to argue with them to put on the meter. They don't have to. Well, most people, it doesn't matter to them as long as they get to the location and they're not being taken advantage of. But who cares how many people think about that you're cheating his boss or you're cheating whatever. Rapam didn't go for this. He looked at the Torah. Every step of the way was a Torah decision. Whatever he did was a Torah decision. So they finally got to the location. He gave him $12, and Rapam was not a rich man. He gave him $12 for the meter, $12 because the man asked he wanted to get paid off the meter, and he gave him a tip in order to be a Kiddush Hashem. This is a person who showed his Talmidim, this is a Rebbe who showed his students what it means that everything is a Torah decision. Not just whether the chicken is kosher or not kosher, or Shabbos questions. No, everything, every step of the way. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the Torah commands the Melech, he takes the Sefer Torah, some Sefer tells us that everything is a Torah decision. Not just what you think is kosher or not kosher, mutter or not mutter. Everything, every step of the way. And therefore, based upon this some Sefer, we can understand something we say every morning. We say every morning, Eilu Dvarim. The pasuk tells us, Eilu Dvarim shadam eichel perasem b'almazeh. These are the things that a person gets reward here in this world. Karen kayemis le'olam haba, and there's also reaps rewards of Karen kayemis in the next. Kibbut avim, honoring one's parents, mius chasadim. We say it every morning, doing kindness. And then finally it says, V'salmud Torah keneged. Talmud, it's a simple interpretation is, the Salmud Torah keneged kulam. Torah is the best. Torah is the best. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. It's better than all these other things. So according to some stuff, you could say it differently. Kibbut avim, all these things, but Talmud Torah keneged kulam. You have to do Torah. When a person honors his parents, which you think you understand, no, you have to look into the Torah, how you honor your parents, what steps you do. When you do chesed, you do kindness to somebody else, you have to look into the Torah, how we should do it, how we should implement it. So the Talmud Torah, the Salmud Torah keneged kulam, besides the simple interpretation, maybe a deeper understanding is that for Salmud Torah, we have to look at every step that we take, and we have to see whether the Torah wants us to do it or not. So that's lesson number one. So number two, the first lesson is we're like trees. Adam eitz hasadeh. We have to always give off fruits. And the second lesson in parshas Shoftim is we learn from the Melech. The Melech had to take the king had to take the Torah with him. Not because he's going to sit necessarily a whole day and learn. But everything he's going to see his whole life in the Torah. Everything that he does. And then there's finally a third lesson. The third lesson is the beginning of the parsha. Torah tells us, Shoftim v'shaitvim, you should appoint judges and shaitvim, people who are going to be like policemen. Titein lecha, you should put for you b'chol sha'arecha in all your gates. There should be shoftim, there should be people who judge the individuals. So Rechaim HaKadosh asked the following question, which we should all ask. What do you mean, Titein lecha, put for you? What do you mean for you? It's for the entire Klal Yisrael. What does it mean, Titein lecha? So the Or HaChaim gives an answer that even the people who appoint these judges. A person who appoints the judge says, they can't tell me what to do. I gave them the job. They can't tell me I'm doing something wrong. No. So therefore, because after all, I'm the one that appointed him. So therefore, the Orach Chaim tells us that even Titein Lecha, that even these Shoftim v'Shoftim that you assigned, they should even Titein Lecha for you also. You're not above the law. No one's above the law. That's how the Orach Chaim explains. So the third thought I'd like to repeat is a thought from Rav Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein's Zatzal, in the Sefer Darash Moshe. They also now have another Sefer which was recently reprinted called Ram. He says a third thought. He says that it's not just talking about judges, it's not just talking about Bezdin and court, it's talking to every individual. He says, I'm going to quote part of it, Shoftim v'Shoftim titein lecha. Just like we said a moment ago, that the king has to take the Sefer Torah and decide every step of the way. Is it a Torah? Does the Torah permit us? Is the Torah not? So too, Shoftim v'Shoftim titein lecha for you. No one should say that I don't have to decide. No matter how great you are, no matter how big the Talmud Chacham you are, you have to decide yourself, for you or yourself. I'm going to read part of it inside. He says, Koya kol echad miYisrael. The opening statement is about every Jew. Ubala Hayres teaches us over here in this parasha. Al adam ba'atzmai, the individual himself. Shetzarachiyah shofet al atzmai, lirais emasa mesukanim. You have to see and judge daily, maybe not just daily, constantly, if your actions are proper. And and if he decides what he's doing is incorrect, he should stop that behavior. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein Zatzal explained that the beginning, the parsha that we read every year, the beginning of Chodesh Elul, has constant lessons how we could get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The first lesson, as I mentioned before, is the lesson that we're compared to trees. The second lesson is that you take the Sefer Torah, you take it with us, like the king does. And the third lesson is that not only you take the Sefer Torah, you decide whether your action, you have to make sure, you have to put shaytrim, put restrictions on oneself to make sure that he should accomplish what the Torah wants. I'm going to read part of it. He has a whole paragraph of Moshe. He writes, even to penalize himself, say, I shouldn't do this, I should do this, in order to get him to a higher level, to better himself. 2 days ago, I mentioned was the Rapam's yahrzeit. The same day, Chav Ches Av, is the yahrzeit of the Netziv, of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. The Netziv, we all heard Chaim Berlin. Chaim Berlin's father was the Netziv. He's buried in the Warsaw Cemetery. The Nazis, Yamach Shemam, when they destroyed Warsaw, by the Warsaw Ghetto and the Warsaw Uprising, they left alone the cemetery, not because they had pity, the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, but rather they were trying to kill the human beings. They weren't busy with taking care of the graves. Anyway, the Netziv is buried in Warsaw. And Netziv, he used to, I just want to tell you, his yahrzeit was 2 days ago, so I want to tell you one story about him. Still have a few more moments. The Netziv, he didn't go to doctors. He didn't go to the doctor. He didn't believe in doctors. He said, when something bothered him, he said, it must be I'm not doing something right. If he had a headache, it must be that my machshavas, my thoughts are not Torah-dik thoughts. So he tried to better himself. And whatever hurt him, he felt was a simon min hashamayim, a sign from heaven, that particular part of his body is not 100% in conjunction with the Torah. This is a great person. This is Netziv. So the story is told one time. He said, I have to go to the doctor. I have to go to the doctor. Netziv, you never used to go to the doctor. What do you have to go to the doctor for? You always, your arm hurt you. You used to say, it's because my arm is not doing enough chesed, not giving enough tzedakah. So he said, I don't know what part, something's bothering me inside. I'm not sure what part it is. For me to try to get closer to Hashem and connect that part of my body to Hashem. So I have to go to the doctor. He'll tell me that it's this or that, and then I can try to better myself and get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is a great Nitziv. The Torah tells us the third lesson is Shoftim v'Shoftim Titin Racha for you, not just for Batei Dinim, not just for courts, assigned for yourself, individuals, meaning yourself, to make sure that you accomplish what the Torah wants of us. And even Shoite al Atzmai, and even restrictions if a person's not doing properly, you have to make a din v'cheshbon, especially during this month of Elul, to try to better oneself. So therefore the Torah tells us, Titein Lecha for you. So three powerful lessons. Three lessons taught us in Parsha Shoftim. The first parsha that we read in Chodesh Elul, where, as we mentioned before, the Kaf HaChaim tells us we have to study Sefer Chagai, where it talks about the redemption on Rosh Chodesh Elul. But before we get to Geula, as we say 3 times a day, we have to do tshuva. Tshuva and Geula. First comes the tshuva, first comes us getting closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and then Emir Hashem will be zeiche to the Geula, will be zeiche to the redemption. I close with the following thought, final thought of the Rambam. The Rambam tells us that this week's parsha talks about Mashiach. Now a person says, where's Mashiach mentioned in the Torah? There's only a hint here and a hint there. Az Yashir Moshe. The Rambam tells us in Hilchas Malachim, he says, in this week's parsha, the Torah tells us that Mashiach will be here. Because by Ari Miklo, when it talks about the cities of refuge in this week's parsha, it says, V'im yarachiv Hashem alakecha es gevulcha. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu will widen your gevul, your boundaries. And Rashi tells us, what do you mean widen our boundaries? What does that mean? So Rashi tells us, after all, Avram Avinu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said more. We only conquered 7 nations. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram Avinu we're going to conquer 10, 3 more. So Rashi says, Kasha Nishbak Hashem swore, Losei Slecha Eretz Kaini Ukenizi V'Kadmoini. There's 3 other nations that we didn't conquer yet. You know when that's going to take place? When Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, Eretz Yisrael is going to be bigger than it is now. And I think these 3 nations is in Jordan and Syria. Eretz Yisrael is going to be a much bigger nation, a much bigger area. So therefore the Rambam tells us from here, it's a commandment. It says you have to, when the land will get bigger, you have to have 3 other cities of refuge. When is that going to be? We don't have those 3. We didn't get the land to be that big. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't command something and give us a mitzvah for nothing. So it's a proof from here that it's in the times of Mashiach that in Mitzvah Hashem, when Mashiach comes, the land will be bigger and we'll have to have 3 other cities of refuge. So we'll be Zeiche Mitzvah Hashem. We get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if we do tshuva, all of us, and we try to implement, whether it's our davening to be better, our learning to be better, during the Chodesh Elul this month, doing more chesed, giving more tzedakah. Each person knows himself what he could improve. Shoftim v'Shoftim Titein Lecha. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is commanded in this week's parsha. Hashem will bring Mashiach. Just like on Rosh Chodesh Elul, Hashem commanded Chagai HaNavi that it's time to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, so too. Mitzvah Hashem, this month will be the month of Geula. And therefore, we know in this week's Haftarah, Hashem tells Yeshaya Hanavi, Anoichi hu menachemchem. I'm going to be the one who's going to bring, who comforts you. May we all be zeiche, Mitzvah Hashem. We should all merit that we should really feel the comfort that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showers upon us. That Hashem will be rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash during the Chodesh Elul. We don't have to wait. Most people think, B'Nisan, Nigalu, we wait for Nisan. No, Chodesh Elul is the time of we have nechama, we have comfort. With the tshuva, we're able to bring comfort. We're able to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash when we all greet Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'mheira v'yameinu, Amen. One more thing before I close. Emir Hashem, our Shir and Navi will take place this coming Sunday evening. Instead of, we've been learning at 7:40, it's going to be 7:30. Emir Hashem, 7:30, because the day is